What's going on, guys? Andrew of Noobart Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking about some Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains, particularly the introduction of the character Soulburner. Now, Soulburner was introduced in Season 2 of the show, and therefore came in right around the 50 episode mark, and I'm making this video at the time of episode 70. Now, when we heard that Soulburner was going to be introduced, and we got his design and everything else, and the way that he was laid out, he was very much posing a lot of concerns to me. Why? Because he seemed like he could be filling the best friend role, which he's basically coming into being that role for Yusaku. And the last time we had a character introduced this late into the show that was going to fill in that arc, they basically ended up sucking up so much of the attention of the rest of the cast that it was just aggravating, because you saw everybody else lose the spotlights that they should have had to either the main character or this new best friend type of character. The best two examples I can think of this are Yu-Gi-Oh! GX with Johan or Jesse in the dub, and Crow in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. Now, I'm just going to loosely touch on those because that's not what this video is supposed to be about, and then I'm going to get back to Vrains. So let's talk a little bit about the GX example first off, right? So, the first two seasons, you've got the issue in GX of it being way too Jaden-centric. I mean, the one thing that they kind of had going for him in those first two seasons is you did sort of have a foil for Jaden in Zane in regards to Season 1, and then Aster in Season 2. Two characters that were both able to beat Jaden at one point, then he's kind of got this arc of eventually being able to beat them again in a duel, and then them being sort of these rivals that have to work together sometimes, those types of things. You get to Season 3, right? You already have the issue of, other than Jaden's foils, and then occasionally these kind of one-off duels that are pretty much irrelevant to the main plot at hand, nobody's really focused on other than Jaden. I mean, heck, you've got Chaz, who's supposed to be the rival of that show, but he never really gets to do much of anything. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, so if we aren't using this cast correctly necessarily to begin with, we'll just fix it by throwing in another character. No, that's completely wrong. That's like saying there's not enough screen time to go around for all of you, so we're gonna add another person that it has to be divided between. Oh, and wait a second, that character needs to get caught up on all the development, because we're gonna be having them fill in one of the primary three roles that Yu-Gi-Oh! Uses in every show, being main pro tag, rival, and then in the case of this new character we're introducing, best friend. So now you end up with the issue of there was this vacuum that all the attention from GX in a lot of ways was more or less thrown in the direction of, well, let's give it to Johan, or let's give it to Jaden, or, you know, there's this guy that needs to lose. Well, I guess we're either having him lose to Jaden or Johan, let's flip a coin. That's really how it felt. Now, granted, I'm not the best to speak about GX because my experiences with Season 3 were shoddy at best, because it ended up driving me so insane that I could never even actually, finish it in full. Instead, I've just seen bits and pieces from throughout the season that's accumulated to me having seen the majority of it at some point or another, and I'm aware of the summaries and stuff. But that show, I wasn't super fond of to begin with, and the introduction of Jesse and him just kind of taking away from everybody else in the show pretty much put the nail in the coffin in it for me, hence why I had the same concerns about Soulburner. So let's touch on the example of 5Ds for a bit, right? Let's go back to the Dark Signers arc. Now, if you talk to most long-time running Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans that have seen basically all the animes and everything else, they pretty much come to the consensus that the Dark Signers arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds is for sure in the top 3 arcs of Yu-Gi-Oh! Ever, and a lot of them seem to come to the consensus that it's probably the best handled in terms of rounding out all your characters and everything else. But a common issue that a lot of people find, myself included, is you didn't need Crow. Like, there's the old meme of they just introduced him to sell Blackwings, right? Well, Crow and that's the only reason they had him there. I mean, every time he was in that plot and doing something significant, it felt like it was a spot that Aki should have been filling in instead of him, or that was just kind of slapped on randomly for no apparent reason. Such as the fact that he was, oh wait, we said this whole time there's 5 signers, right? We're gonna make it so there's 6, because, yeah, Leo, he's supposed to be a signer too, or, Luca, depending on Lua, depending on which version of the show you're watching, dub or sub. But yeah, we planned for him to be a signer from the beginning, but now we got this new Crow guy, so you know how we said there's 5 signers, right? Well, let's make there 6. This is mythology, we can fudge it as we want, right? Well, they're not even staying canon to their own mythos. Why? Because they had to force this new character into there for their agenda, whether that be Blackwings or just to throw him in there, and now he's filling that best friend role, much like Jesse did. Now he's occupying screen time that other characters should have had, much like Jesse did, and you had these other characters that had a lot of really interesting, like, setup for them. I mean, it was cool to watch Luca and Lua and the way they were developing as duelists. You know, Luca was the stronger one, but she was kind of lacking behind in her confidence sometimes. Lua was a lot more confident, he was a lot more courageous in what he was doing, but he was lacking some of the dueling skills, so they kind of balanced each other out, and when they had to tag duel together, they oftentimes made for an interesting team. We got to see them develop as siblings, as friends, learn from Yusei, etc. Then we've got Aki. She had one of the most compelling story arcs of any character in Yu-Gi-Oh! Ever, at least in my opinion. And then that just ends up getting cut so dramatically short the second Crow's introduced, because it goes from being kind of our main three, our Yusei, Jack, and Aki, to Yusei, Jack, and Crow, who we literally just met, and now we gotta give him a bunch of screen time because he was introduced late into the show, and he wasn't even necessarily in the original plan to begin with, at least in the role that he ended up playing as the best friend. So he ends up chewing up, once more, time from other characters, and that's what Jesse did. So keeping both of those in mind, Vrains is kind of set up to be in a similar situation, right? Yusaku didn't really have that best friend role, per se, filled in too heavily, and he did have kind of two other characters built around him, very much like Yusei did in Aoi and Go, only they were way more underutilized than Jack and Aki, in my opinion at least, got far less development, far less ideas as to their motivations, where they were going, etc., etc. But I was holding out hope because of the overall tonality of Vrains and everything. It seemed to me like they could be setting up for a less playmaker-centric Season 2. Then we cut forward to when Season 2 actually starts, and it's like, yeah, we're gonna focus less on Playmaker, for sure. We're gonna give that screen time that should have been going to the rest of our cast that, you know, seemed really interesting. Aoi, Go, Ghost Girl, Akira, Revolver, Spectre, etc. We're gonna give the majority of that to this new guy, Soulburner. Why? Because we got this really good voice actor from Japan. No knock at him, I do think his performance is pretty freaking fantastic as Soulburner, and definitely one of the pros, which I'll touch on in a bit of having him in the show. But regardless, we're just gonna feed it over to him. We aren't gonna pay attention to anything else for a bit. So in other words, now you're kind of set up with, you've got this two-character system, right? Because you've got to catch Soulburner's development up to where it should be for the best friend in a show like this. And so, you know, we go from Season 1, which I already complained in my Season 1 review about how Playmaker-centric it was. We go from basically having one flavor of duels, being Playmaker all the time, to Season 2 with two flavors of duels being now Playmaker and Soulburner. So because Soulburner's in there, we've now been encountering the issue, at least in my opinion, of so many other characters being dropped, and then on top of Soulburner, you're introducing so many others. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of reminding me of the struggle GX had, and also in some ways the struggle that Arc 5 and the latter chunks of it had, and Zexal had to some extent at times, though I would argue Zexal overall probably handled it best, and having just too many characters going on and too many new characters introduced before you've really set the foundations for your original lineup of a cast. Because if you think about it, in Season 2, we had Soulburner introduced, now we're starting to meet some of the chess pieces, now we've got a whole new set of antagonists, we're meeting all the rest of the AIs, and they're trying to develop the Knights of Fenoy somewhat, I think. I mean, they're back on screen now, I can't tell whether they're going to develop them this time, or they're just going to continue to be these background characters that we're supposed to think are powerful and relevant when they're really just kind of thrown together. So with that being the case, Soulburner, I just don't know if he was the right strategic move for this show. Yeah, he's added some spice and flavor to it, in that he's given us a little bit more variety, and he filled in a role that wasn't necessarily filled by anyone else in the show. But there's no reason you couldn't have taken another cast member that was already introduced, that we were already wanting to know more about, and had them step up to the plate to fill that in, such as Go, such as Aoi, such as Akira, for all I know. Any of them could have stepped up to be that sort of best friend. We could have had Kusanagi just get developed a lot more. Any of those could have potentially worked. Instead, you kind of kick those characters to the curb to make room for Soulburner. At least in my opinion, that's kind of the way it's come across. Now, maybe this could still be fixed. We have seen some setups for some development on some of these other characters. For example, Aoi seems to be trying to establish some of her own independence and faith in herself again this season, with the whole Blue Girl thing, teaming up with Emma, sort of becoming her protege, and separating herself some from dependence on Akira all the time. Not that I would even argue she necessarily had that, but it's kind of like this coming into her own type of an arc. Go's got this, I'm an edgy bounty hunter because Playmaker took away my charisma dueling spirit after I lost to him type of attitude going on right now. But we haven't gotten very much focus on him since he had that duel against Soulburner. So all of this is in a very weird setup. Now, right now I've mainly been knocking the introduction of Soulburner. but I don't entirely hate him as a character, so let's get into some of the pros here. A, you have a fantastic voice actor playing him. I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but I think he is doing a really good job. I think the character as a whole is coming across as very authentic, very genuine. I think he serves as a good foil to Playmaker sometimes, and I think it humanizes Yusaku some to have somebody that he can lean on. So I think someone needed to fill that role, and it's good to see that the writers at least acknowledge that, okay, we can't just have this edgy, I'm on my own, I don't even consider the guy who's behind the monitor literally protecting me from everything to be a friend, he's just an acquaintance. I like the fact that the writers seem to acknowledge, alright, that's a touch irrelatable for the majority of our audience, we'll give him some friends and such. Or not even so much irrelatable as it just makes Yusaku come across as being even more of a perfect Mary Sue, and that he doesn't even need to really lean on people, so having someone there that does help bail him out sometimes and those types of things really has, I think, helped the dynamic of the show as a whole. I still don't think Soulburner was necessarily the best pick to fill that role, since we had so many other characters that could have stepped up and done it for him, but he was somebody to do it, so I do like the fact that they acknowledged it. Voice actor's done a great job with him. I do think the character has given us some interesting perspectives on things. He's gotten arguably the most backstory of any of our characters into the Lost Incident. We had that whole episode focused around how, or basically caused by like a terrifying flashback that he endured, where he was basically back in his past again right after the Lost Incident. He had to move in with his grandparents, and he was basically struggling to find himself. I thought that was a really relatable arc, and then, you know, Flame comes through and he's like, you know, hey, you gotta get yourself up and out of this rut. You know, I know dueling got ruined for you because of its association with this experience, but you need to understand that that's not dueling as a whole. That's the Lost Incident. You need to separate those two. And I think in conquering and overcoming, you know, this obstacle that's laying in place of your love of dueling, and starting to duel again, starting to form these new memories, starting to take a step forward and face your demons, you're gonna get further. I think that's a very relatable arc for a lot of people. Now granted, obviously for most of us in the real world, it's not going to necessarily be playing a card game, but I think there's plenty of times where those of us who do something we love experience a really negative memory with that kind of taints it for us and can make us want to distance ourselves from it for a while. And then, you know, it kind of haunts us for a long time because we've got this piece of ourselves that we really cared about that we're now separated from because of that one scarring memory. Then, you know, if we finally do start to adapt that old hobby that we enjoyed so much again, it kind of does help us to overcome and deal with our issues a lot of times. Same deal Soulburner's having with dueling here. It was ruined by the Lost Incident, now he's doing it again, now he's moving forward. So I like Soulburner's character for the most part. Now, back to a flaw for a second here. I don't like the fact that currently we've kind of got two Mary Sues going on, in that neither Soulburner or Yusaku have lost on screen yet. I already had a big enough issue with that happening with Yusaku, just because I feel like all the main characters need to lose at some point for them to be humanized. I mean, even Yusei, who most people say is the worst instance of a Mary Sue we've had in the past, like past protagonists not counting Vrains, lost to Kiryu in the first season, and that was one of the most compelling duels we've seen because of the way it was set up. So I'm hoping maybe both of these guys are going to lose at some point. So I guess the question I'm really posing with this video is, was Soulburner a good addition to the show? Because he did bring in an interesting overall character. He does active level Yusaku out some. He does act as another character we've got in to tie to the Ignises without necessarily forcing an Ignis into the backstory of another character. Or was he a mistake because he's sucking up all the screen time from a lot of other cast members that we haven't gotten to get a lot of introduction to that we would like to see more of? Regardless of what you guys' opinions are, be sure to let me know in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time on some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains discussion.